staying safe in this quarantine. So last weekend it was Mother's Day, and I was gonna put this video up then, but I was hanging out with my mom. But we're gonna talk about Theresa Knorr, who ended up killing her own children. She killed 2 of them. Theresa Knorr was born November 10th, 1946 in Sacramento, California. So her parents had this machine that made pencils, and so her family was kind of okay, kind of doing well enough for the circumstances in the 40s, 50s. Then her dad ended up getting sick and he got Parkinson's, so he couldn't work anymore. And then the mom had to be the sole breadwinner, and then her mom ended up having a heart attack and she died just when Theresa was 15 years old. And that kind of impacted her because she lost her mom, and then in some of the reports I was reading, it said that her mom died in her eyes, which can be very traumatic. Theresa, longing for that kind of affection and love, she ended up meeting Clifford Clyde Sanders. She was only 15, so it was around the time when her mother had died, and she married him and she had her first child with him, Howard Sanders. She had said that Cliff was troublesome and that he was an alcoholic and he was abusive towards her. So one day she had filed charges against him after being punched in the face very badly. And she was saying that it was in a drunken argument and that they had been fighting. He hit her. So on July 6, 1964, during one of their arguments, Theresa ended up shooting Cliff with a rifle and he died. So she ended up going to trial, and in the trial she was saying that he was very abusive and that the fight had just escalated and she shot him in self-defense. And then what's strange is that in this courtroom, everybody seemed to feel really bad for her and believe her, and people were like, oh, this poor girl, like she's been through some abuse, she's so young, because she was, had married him when she was 15. And so she was like a young mother, and she was saying that he was being abusive, so like everybody just felt really bad for her. His side of the family, however, had a lot to say about Theresa, saying that she was manipulative and calculating, and that they feel that if she shot him, it was not in self-defense, that it was a calculated move and she had planned the attack. However, they found her not guilty, and so she was able to kind of just move on from this whole ordeal. So she was found not guilty, and she ended up being pregnant a second time with a daughter who she named Sheila Gay. And then after some time had passed, she married her second husband in 1966. And she married Robert Knorr, and she was very obsessive and thinking he was cheating on her, and they would fight all the time. At the time, she was pregnant with her 3rd child. So the couple had been fighting, and they ended up having 3 more children: William, Robert Jr., and a baby girl that they named Theresa after herself, and they nicknamed her Terry. The couple ended up divorcing because of all the fights, and then once they did get a divorce, Theresa would not let Robert see the children. She kind of used the children against him, saying, okay, great, if you're not going to be with me, you're not going to see your kids either. And so Robert Knorr ended up just kind of not being able to see his children, kind of losing his ties with his children. Theresa was very abusive towards her children, but she mainly took it out on the girls. The boys were more of her favorite, but it's not that she didn't abuse the boys. She did like physically abuse them, but it was just not as much as the girls. She really had it out for the girls. She thought that the girls were the reason that she was gaining weight, and she just kind of focused all her hatreds towards the girls because the girls were grown up and they were getting more beautiful, and she kind of felt as if they were competing with her. So one day, Suzanne, who is Theresa and Robert Knorr's child, had gotten into a fight, and Theresa ended up getting a gun and shot her. And Theresa had shot her daughter because she was convinced that Susan was using magic to, make her gain weight And she was kind of delusional, thinking that her daughter was doing these things, and so she shot her. And she ended up shooting her with a .22 caliber pistol in her back. Theresa would not let her get medical attention because, of course, if she got medical attention, the ER would be like, what happened? Who did this? And she just didn't want to be caught and get punished for abusing her child, shooting her child in the back. So she didn't seek any medical attention for Suzanne, and she kind of just left her in the bathtub. She ordered her other daughters, Sheila and Terry, to kind of help her nurse Suzanne back to health. And so eventually Suzanne did recover. 2 years later, Suzanne and her mom had gotten into a fight because Suzanne wanted to move. She was over the abuse, she just wanted to leave. And so Theresa ended up stabbing her with some scissors. So at this point she shot her 2 years prior, and now in another argument she stabbed her with scissors. Suzanne had it. She's like, I'm moving to Alaska, I don't want to be here anymore. But Theresa, being paranoid, decided, you can go to Alaska, that's fine, but I'm removing the bullet, because she didn't want the bullet to end up being traced back to her, and then people would know that she shot her daughter. Suzanne reluctantly agreed because she really wanted to just get out of there. So Theresa gave her pills and alcohol to kind of numb her a little bit, and she ended up getting her sons, Robert and William, to help her get the bullet out of Theresa's back. But once they did this, Suzanne, once again, wasn't allowed to get any medical treatment. She was kind of left in the house to just kind of get better, and she was on the floor. Her siblings were so desensitized by this point that they would just kind of walk over her body, and she ended up developing sepsis and was delirious, but they wouldn't give her any medical attention. And so by then Suzanne was getting worse, and she could no longer control her bowel movements. So Theresa put her in diapers and kind of just like chained her to the table and just kind of like left her there to die, really. On July 16th, 1984, Theresa realized that her daughter was not going to get better and she was not going to get her medical treatment. So she decided that she would have to get rid of Susan. So she ordered her sons, Robert and William, to help her take Suzanne's body, put it in the car, take all her belongings with her, and drive. They ended up driving to this area called Squaw Valley, and they kind of just dumped Suzanne's body and her belongings. And so then Theresa ordered them to pour gasoline on her and her stuff and light her on fire. And she was still alive when this happened. They just drove away. So the body was found 1 day later. The police could not ID her, so they just named her Jane Doe because they didn't know who this girl was. Her body had been burnt. Her stuff, she didn't have that many stuff, had been burnt. They had found a pair of diapers near the area, and so they were like, this is really strange and confusing, but they were never able to positively ID who she was, and nobody came forward. Theresa didn't. She just kind of went on her life with her children like nothing had happened. After Suzanne's death, all of Theresa's rage kind of went towards her first daughter, Sheila. She told Sheila to, prostitute herself so that they could make money and she could help with the bills at the house. So she was allowed to leave the house. And then one day during an argument, she was convinced that Sheila had an STD and that she was pregnant. And Sheila was like, I'm not pregnant. Theresa was just completely delusional. So Theresa just was so delusional. She didn't believe Sheila when Sheila was like, I'm not pregnant. I don't have an STD. And so she ended up hog tying her and putting her in a closet. And the closet was not that big, so she couldn't really have any space to move around. She just was kind of just standing there, didn't have, she couldn't move, sit, really do anything. And she didn't allow any of her other children to give her food or water. And so the closet didn't have that much ventilation in there anyway. So Sheila, desperate to get out, confessed to her mom and was like, I'm pregnant, yes, I have an STD, just let me out. But on July 21st, 1985, Just 1 year after Suzanne's death, Sheila ended up passing away in the closet from starvation and dehydration. But she didn't check on her. The body was in the closet for 3 days. So once the body began decomposing, Theresa realized that she had to do something. She had to get, Sheila out of there, because people would be able to smell the decomposing body, and then they'd come investigate, and then they'd arrest her. And like, her line of thinking was, misproportionate in priorities. So she was completely, ajar to what was happening in reality. And she was like, we have to get rid of the body because it's decomposing. So once again, she recruited her sons, William and Robert Jr., to grab their sister's body and dump her in a cardboard box. And so they ended up putting her in this cardboard box and dumping the body near the airport. So Sheila was found that same day, and similar to Suzanne, the police could not identify the body. They didn't know who this person was. They couldn't make any kind of identification, so they labeled her Jane Doe as well. So Theresa started to get paranoid, believed that the stench in the apartment was going to cause suspicion, and so she decided to tell her youngest daughter, Terry, to set the house on fire. So Theresa Knorr went into hiding. Her older son, William and Robert, decided to go their own way and just kind of separate from her finally. Theresa ended up going to Utah, and she was living under another identity, working as a personal care assistant. So Terry ended up trying to tell police what happened. This was years later. So she tried calling the police and reporting 2 murders. And the police in Utah, they didn't believe her. They were just like, this is really weird. She, was just feeling so guilty for not having come forward earlier. But, of course she was so afraid of what her mother would do, because she knew what her mother was capable of. So she didn't really have the courage to say anything until they all kind of went their own way. So then, since the Utah police didn't believe her, she ended up calling the Sacramento police, and she reported the 2 murders. But the Sacramento police, having worked those 2 cases, were like, that sounds very similar to 2 bodies that we found, and they ended up connecting that the 2 bodies were Suzanne and Sheila. And so at this point, the police, they had never stopped completely working the case, but it had gone a little bit cold, though they were just Jane Does. So on November 10th, 1993, Theresa, who was now living in Salt Lake City, was arrested for the murders of her 2 daughters. She was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 2 special circumstance charges because of the way she had disposed of the bodies. So she had at first pled not guilty, but her son, Robert Jr., had already been in jail for a previous crime. He had killed a guy that he fought with in a bar. He was already doing time in jail for that. When she found out that her son, Robert Jr., was going to testify against her, she ended up pleading guilty, because if Robert testified, he would get a reduced charge. So she just ended up pleading guilty to the 2 murder charges. Also, if she ended up pleading guilty, they would remove the death penalty, and so she would just get life in prison. Theresa ended up getting 2 life sentences, one for Sheila's murder and one for Suzanne's murder. She ended up in California Institution for Women, which is in Chino, California, and she's still there today. Her son William had to go intensive therapy. He got dismissed of all charges but one, which was accessory after the fact, for his testimony against his mother. Robert ended up spending 16 years plus 3 years for murdering the bartender in Las Vegas, and the 3 years were for his participation in his sister's murders. So Terry Knorr, Theresa's youngest daughter, after having coming forward to finally tell somebody what had happened to her sisters, she was so traumatized, as I'm sure even the boys are traumatized. It's easy to say, oh, they were big enough, they could have done something, and maybe that is true, but kind of this, brainwash. They grew up knowing nothing but what their mother had told them, and the violence, and it's kind of that fend for yourself. If I don't help her do this, then she's gonna do this to me. And they had seen what their mother was capable of doing. And so they ended up, I'm sure, having lifelong psychological issues. That growing up in a house like that, you can't even imagine what kind of fears that they had in their mind, being afraid all the time. So Terry's youngest daughter in 2011, at the age of just 41, ended up dying of heart failure, which is so sad to just imagine. She had to live through all this trauma and all this maybe guilt, PTSD, and psychological issues, and maybe depression, I don't know, I'm just speculating. And just living with that, you know, probably took a toll on her. And it's, you know, it's sad because she was finally able to escape and, you know, be able to tell someone what happened to her sisters, and then she died so young. So Theresa Knorr continues to be in prison in California, and she will be eligible for parole in 2027, which is actually not that far away. She's got 7 years to go before she's eligible for parole, and that lady, listen, she should not come out of jail. A lot of people believe that Theresa Knorr suffered from borderline personality disorder, and that possibly witnessing her mother die at such a young age had an impact on her that could have triggered the borderline personality disorder, because she was, you know, delusional. She believed her daughters were doing magic to make her gain weight, and she would have all these ideas about her daughters, like her daughter being pregnant when she wasn't. She was delusional. But let me know what you guys think, and let me know down in the comments what video or what case you would like to see next. Bye guys. Okay.